Okay.
Yeah. Hope you like it. It's just a small token of appreciation.
Gotcha. Cool.
And I thought I had 15 minutes to start, if that's okay. Is that okay with you?
Yeah,
I'll
really?
be the quickest 15 minutes.
Okay, go for it. Ready to write.
Okay. So alhamdulillah, salat. Thank you to Modern Day Debates for hosting, and thank you to Destiny. I want to start with some disambiguation. In this debate, I'm talking about liberalism as a moral and political philosophy that embraces two core values: individual freedom and equality. This means that liberalism, as discussed in academic context, is broader than just left-wing politics. A person could be right-wing in an American political context, but still be liberal in the sense that he believes in freedom, equality, democracy, etc. So definitions aside, let me state my problem with liberalism as a moral and political philosophy. The problem with liberalism is that it fundamentally conflicts with human biology and with all traditional cultures and religions, especially Islam. Liberalism deals with this conflict through systematic oppression. Let me explain. Existing studies of human biology and psychology show that these two liberal values of freedom and equality are actually universal, and they're endorsed in all human religious and cultural systems to some extent. This includes Islam. However, in traditional cultures, freedom and equality are not the only important values. There are other values that are important. In these societies, people value specific types of relationships, like marriage, like family, like community, like a relationship with God. Countless studies have established that valuing these relationships is part and parcel of natural human psychology. It's inbuilt. The reality is there are certain things that humans naturally crave, that they naturally find moral value in, that they naturally need for their happiness. The problem is that human biology is such that these types of relationships that are valued by human beings, things like marriage, family, community, and religion, these types of relationships include some measure of inequality and some measure of restriction on individual freedom. One big example is marriage. Humans biologically want to pair bond. They want to form these stable, long-term relationships with the opposite sex. So they get married. But marriage is something that results in restrictions on individual freedom. For example, you have certain obligations toward your spouse, which means you sometimes have to sacrifice your personal wants in order to fulfill those obligations. Marriage also involves some measure of sexual exclusivity, which further restricts your freedom. Marriage also entails division of labor because women get pregnant and have to nurse. There's also a type of inequality because you have different duties for male and female. So this type of sex differentiated pair bonding, which includes these inequalities and lack of freedom, is found in all liberal societies and cultures. Similarly, family life and maintaining relationships with parents, children, grandparents, etc., this is something people naturally value, but again, it requires restrictions on your freedom because you have duties to your parents, to your family members. You have to take care of children when they're young, and you have to take care of your parents when they're old. These obligations will often require you to sacrifice your personal autonomy. You also demand respect from your children, and they're required to obey you up to a certain age. That all involves some level of inequality. So maintaining family requires these limitations on freedom and equality. Similarly, humans naturally crave community and naturally believe that they're part of a people. They're in the black community, the Hispanic community, Muslim community, Irish community. And humans naturally don't want their people and the traditions and cultures of their people to be destroyed. But the reality is community also requires certain types of inequality and lack of freedom. People in a given community have duties in order to maintain traditional norms in terms of shared dress, shared language, shared rituals. So that limits individual freedom, and all communities require hierarchies in some form or fashion. Some communities limit intermarriage, some communities require assimilation or limit immigration into their countries. All that involves the maintenance of certain inequalities. Finally, humans biologically have a belief in God. This is established in numerous psychological studies across cultures that academics discuss like Paul Bloom, Oliver Petrovich, Aya Naranzian, and others. But again, belief in God leads to a lack of equality because people believe God is above them and that God requires some form of obedience and worship. This involves restrictions on one's personal freedom. People have obligations to pray, to fast, to do rituals. These obligations detract from individual freedom. So we have marriage, family, community, and God, and maintaining these relationships and the social institutions associated with these relationships requires some measure of inequality and some measure of lack of freedom. And that's a big problem for liberalism. And this is exactly why liberalism is hostile to all traditional societies and cultures, but especially Islam. But it gets worse because liberalism doesn't just say freedom and equality are good things. If that's all that liberalism said, that wouldn't be a problem because everyone, including Muslims, agrees that freedom and equality are great things to some extent. But what liberalism actually says is that we need to maximize freedom and equality above all else. And if maximizing freedom and equality means the dissolution of other values and traditions, so be it. What is evident is that if you adopt liberalism, this inevitably leads to the gradual elimination of marriage, family, community, and religion in society. Why? Because all of these things involve, for biological reasons, certain limitations on freedom and equality. So liberalism in that sense is hostile to the traditions of every single society in the world. Now, if European liberals had conceded or decided in the 18th and 19th century, look, liberalism is our way of life, we're going to keep it to ourselves and leave the rest of the world alone, that would have been one thing. But that's not the direction they went in. From its very inception, liberalism was intertwined with colonialism and the subjugation of non-European people. One of the best books about this is titled Liberalism, a Counter-History by Italian historian Domenico Losordo. Also the book Liberalism and Empire by Uday Mehta. What Losordo and Mehta and many other academics like Edward Said, Frantz Fanon, Chandra Mahante, and on, they all document in excruciating detail how European colonialists dominated non-liberal people with the stated goal of bringing them freedom and equality. This was known as the white man's burden or the civilizing mission. The enlightened European man who understands the value of freedom, equality, democracy, etc., has the burden of civilizing the savages across the world. Understanding this civilizing mission helps us to see how brutal government domination and liberalism are perfectly compatible. In fact, liberalism sometimes requires brutal government domination. One of the foremost liberal thinkers and one of the founders of liberalism, John Stuart Mill, expresses this well in his landmark book On Liberty. Mill says, despotism is a legitimate mode of government in dealing with barbarians, provided that the end be their improvement, end quote. In other words, the ends justify the means. Mill also says, quote, there are conditions of society in which a vigorous despotism is in itself the best mode of government for training the people in what is specifically wanting, to render them capable of a higher civilization. So you see, liberalism is such a merciful and loving philosophy. Liberals just want everyone to be happy and live in a utopia or a higher civilization, as Mill puts it. The only problem is the world is full of backwards people who don't understand the importance of maximizing freedom and equality, either because they're religious fanatics, misogynists, child abusers, homophobes, sadistic proponents of capital punishment, sadists who abuse animals with ritual slaughter, etc. In short, the world is full of people who just don't know what's good for them. So it's the job of liberals to be the saviors and bring enlightenment to the world, whether the world wants it or not. The problem is transforming people into liberals is not easy. Turns out most people around the world don't want to abandon their way of life in order to become quote-unquote civilized or developed. So to overcome this resistance, liberals have taken a number of approaches over the past 200 years. There's the hard approach of despotism, as Mill puts it, an outright war, occupation, authoritarian governance, crippling economic sanctions, genocide. Then there's the soft approach of bribes, social engineering, NGOs, reshaping indigenous institutions, media, and so on. Whether it's with the carrot or the stick, liberalism imposes its vision of progress, development, freedom, and equality onto the rest of the world, and the rest of the world better fall in line, or else.